Okay, good evening everybody. Thank you for attending this last Cabinet meeting of 2018. Apologies for absence. I think we've just got the one Deb, which is John Minor. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. I'd like to declare an interest in item 4, the Youth Justice Plan. I do practice law in the youth court from time to time, but I don't think it's a pecuniary interest. I think it's something I just need to declare for the transparency. Arnold?
I have to declare an interest. I chair the youth courts.
There you are. Thank you very much. Item 3 then is the minutes. Everybody happy with the minutes? Yes? Okay, in which case I'll sign them. So the next item then is item 4, which is the Youth Justice Plan. Councillor Watt then.
Thank you. Thanks. This is the annual Youth Justice Plan. We have people there and here to answer any technical issues. First time entrance to the justice system this year was 304 per 100,000 10 to 17 year olds, and that's down 478 in 2016. The youth population is down from 478 to 304, representing a significant improvement. In 2017, there were just 5 custodial sentences in Telford and Wrekin, equating to a rate of 0.30, which compares favourably with the national rate of 0.39. In respect of reoffending, there are proportionally less young people reoffending in Telford and Wrekin than for West Mercia, but those that do reoffend are committing more offences. It's great news that overall the cohort sizes are decreasing year on year. In year ending 2010, there were 451 offenders in the cohort and 531 reoffences, compared to a cohort size of 182 with 336 reoffences in reporting period June 2016. This is a 36% decrease during this period. It's good news, however. The report and the strategy remind us that we can't be complacent. The report details how the findings of the recent pilot joint inspection is informing the future development of the service, that we must remember is unusual because it's a joint youth offending service made up of 4 local authorities across West Mercia Police Region under the Police and Crime Commissioner. The work plan identifies more work to do on the overall vision for the service, work on the decision-making process for out-of-court disposals to make sure that all options are properly considered, improve the intervention plans to make them more focused on better outcomes, improve information sharing between partners, and better support for those young people who need support but do not quite meet the criteria for mental health services. I know the Management Board will be working hard to further improve these vital services to keep our young people out of the justice system. I'm also going to be asking them to look at extra pressures being placed on the system by the centralisation of remand cases of Kidderminster, which is causing us some real problems at the moment. For our young people, this only increases the strain on them and the impacts on the likelihood of the improving outcomes that this report describes being achieved in the future. The change of the court service to Kidderminster, I think, has had a real effect on young people in this town and the families around those young people. Justice is a really important part of the process, and for that justice not to be local justice, I think, is appalling. I think the Ministry of Justice should think again about those changes, because it is having an effect on our young people and their families. I move the recommendations, and if there are any technical questions, then I'm sure Keith can help us.
Keith, before I open up to questions, anything you want to add at this time?
Nothing I want to add. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Councillor Reid?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the report, which provides quite a high-level overview, really. I think it would be helpful to have more details. Certainly a greater breakdown by area would be helpful, certainly for the future development of the service itself. And a breakdown, I think, to causes of crime as well, relating to drugs and alcohol. That would also be extremely useful. That would enable us to understand the problem, I think, or the problems to a greater extent, and perhaps fine-tune the strategy and help us to target resources in that direction. I'm glad the Cabinet member made a comment about the desirability of centralising remand cases at Kidderminster, because I agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. It adds extra pressure to the system. It certainly doesn't help, and it doesn't help with natural justice. Now, if my memory serves me right, I think we put a motion to full council about this some time ago that received unanimous support. I wonder if we could do something similar again between us and we actually start to pursue this. Because I don't think this is helpful to an area like Telford or Shropshire at all, to be quite honest.
Bill?
I'd echo that completely. Digging down into the statistics will be useful because it's nice to know where the cores are. I'm really pleased that in the reoffending and the number of people entering the system has gone down. Employment helps with these things in part, and our low unemployment at the moment is part of that, and also the low NEETs that we have. But also it means that at the moment West Mercia Police must be having their resources out there to combat what is prevalent in other cities and urban areas, which is the drug culture and alcohol culture, particularly drugs, where they're looking for out-of-town places to come and set up areas and everything else. And my wife reminded me, it was on the police authority many years ago, it was rumoured at one stage, or it can be pursued, that we were joining West Mercia Police with West Midlands Police, which would have been a disaster, because you can imagine the resources would all be targeted on the city areas, and West Mercia would have been left with hardly anything, which is part of the argument we've had with regards to Shropshire and to Telford and Wrekin remaining independent, because we have an independent police force, better resource probably per capita than probably West Midlands because of what they're having to cope with in the West Midlands. We can try and hit these problems before they become a real problem. So I'm encouraged by the report.
Thank you, Bill. Keith, would you just pick up the 2 points? The first one was around drilling down the detail to a more local level and the causes, and then in respect of the centralisation of remand cases to Kidderminster, please.
Yep, certainly. I presume that first comment is in relation to future reports, future youth justice plans, and obviously we can provide, perhaps not as part of the plan itself, but perhaps as a separate exercise, more detailed information and profile around youth offending within Telford and Wrekin, and do some of the comparisons that have been asked for against the other areas in West Mercia. So that's one we can respond positively to. In terms of the remand cases going to Kidderminster, obviously that's outside of the direct control and influence of the Youth Justice Service. It's a decision taken by HM Court and Tribunal Service. Obviously it does cause a greater inconvenience for individual children, young people that do have to go to that remand court. It is very small numbers of children and young people from Telford that actually are kept in custody overnight and produced before the remand court, so the numbers are very low, and that we've put systems in place to make sure that we arrive at that court in a timely fashion, so there's no undue delay caused because of a response from the Youth Justice Service.
Thank you, Keith. Paul?
Yeah, just picking up on points that were made, I mean, clearly, yes, the causes of crime are obviously a huge concern, and we know that there's a link between poverty and sort of the some of the issues that have come through the current government's austerity measures that link us to youth crime. And I agree with you totally, Andrew. We need to be looking at the causes of crime and doing something about those causes of crime totally, and welcome that line. In terms of the courts, I agree, but unfortunately, Keith, I think if one young person is in any way in custody when they don't need to be in custody, that is a problem for us, and we need to deal with that. And I think, and I'll speak to the leader about it, Andrew, but I agree with you totally and feel that we should do something about that in the future, and maybe something as a full council, In terms of the merger of the police forces, I think it was Warwickshire and West Mercia that were going to merge, and they're not merging. So, but I agree. I think the West Mercia youth justice process has been positive overall, and the changes that we made a few years ago were we were stepping into the unknown, but I think it is working quite well for young people, and I think the report says that the service that we give to young people in terms of the youth justice service in Telford Wrekin is meeting the needs of those young people. So.
Thank you. Well, this report goes on to full council, so I'm sure that at full council concerns can be raised. I mean, for our part, the leader of Shropshire Council, Herefordshire Council, myself, the chairman of the Local Enterprise Partnership, have all written to the Ministry of Justice, together with the Police and Crime Commissioner, stating our objections to the centralisation of the remand courts. I myself, with Councillor Nutting, leader of Shropshire, spoke to the Lord Chancellor when he was in Telford a couple of months ago, and he said that he was keeping an active review on this change. But I do think that the pressure of both children and youth courts, but also adult courts, and the complete waste of money that's providing, is a clear indication that the government has to intervene and change this. We get the same line from government. It's all about local decision making, but of course the government are responsible for the smooth and effective running of our courts. And I think it's a crying shame that Shropshire is the only county in England not to have a fully functioning magistrates court. It really is dire. We had many county magistrates courts over the years. Those have been steadily closed, and we had two up until very recently, one in Shrewsbury and one in Telford. The Shrewsbury one was closed and centralised at Telford. And if you live in Ludlow or Oswestry, getting to Telford is difficult. But if you are a family member, your mum or dad, a concerned mum or dad of a young child who's got themselves into trouble, then getting to Kidderminster is almost impossible. So I do hope that the government can intervene. I'm more than happy, Andrew, to pen a letter to the government with you and Bill. Maybe we can invite Peter Nutting and Jonathan from Herefordshire and the Police and Crime Commissioner to join us in that, just to underline the importance. But I'm afraid passing another motion, I think it's landing on deaf ears. But nevertheless, if that's the consensus, then maybe we should do that. So the Youth Justice Plan is going to full council, but for the purposes of today, all those in favour? That's you're abstaining, Arnold?
Declaration of interest. Well, having declared an interest, that's all I must.
Well, I don't think we'll have a clear interest. Item 5 is the Telford Wrekin Domestic Abuse Strategy. Thank you very much, Keith. For 2019-2021. Councillor Ray Evans.
As we know, domestic abuse can affect anyone, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation, age, race, religion, wealth or geography. However, it should be noted that some groups of people are disproportionately affected, such as women, young people under 25, and those with disabilities or mental health problems. The lives of many women, children, young people and men can be significantly affected by domestic abuse, and it's not always easy to identify, and victims often live with repeat domestic abuse for years without seeking help. Sadly, the number of domestic abuse related offences in Telford and Wrekin is higher than other areas in West Mercia, but it should be remembered that comparisons are difficult because the demographics of the borough are very different to other areas in the Alliance. Cabinet, this strategy aims to tackle not only domestic abuse, but emotional abuse, controlling behaviour, as well as honour-based violence, forced marriage and female genital mutilation. In seeking to prevent domestic abuse, we are also strengthening a wider local ambition to tackle the so-called toxic trio combination of risk, that is, substance misuse, poor mental health and domestic abuse, which are all common features of family where harm occurs to children. This complex issue is therefore also a priority for multiple partnership boards in Telford Wrekin, including the HWB, CSP and Children and Adult Safeguarding Boards. This ambitious strategy encompasses 6 key objectives, which include using intelligence more effectively to better assess need and inform service improvement, better training across our frontline workforce, continuing to raise community awareness through activities such as the White Ribbon campaign, and development of the service and support offers to those affected, which is a clear priority. It is clearly recognised that no single agency can address this complex issue in isolation. Collaborative work across partners, including the identification of substantial funding streams, will be crucial to the success of this plan, and I thank all of those involved in compiling this strategy. Cabinet, I know that there is strong commitment to address this unacceptable aspect of society here within the Cabinet, as well as the strategic and operational levels within the Council and across multiple teams working with the police, probation service and local NHS organisations. I therefore invite you to approve the Telford Wrekin Domestic Abuse Strategy 2019 to 2021 and agree that because of its importance it should be taken to full council.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from the leaders of the opposition? Okay, thanks. Thank you, Andrew. Yes?
I welcome the provision of an abuse strategy and the inclusion of abuse against men as well. Now, that was the subject of some debate at one of the previous full councils. I think it was the full council before last. While welcoming the report, I'm a little surprised that it's taken this long to produce, bearing in mind how long we've been running the White Ribbon campaign. I also note, which is interesting, the comments about resourcing this. There's only a small amount of money available via the Police and Crime Commission of £2,500, which has been funding the White Ribbon campaign. So I think while welcome and helpful, we should consider making this a key issue, along with mental health and substance abuse, and make it a priority for further work to be done. And certainly comparisons with like areas, and we compare like with like, I think that would be gives a far better measure of the situation here. And what we will need to do, if we're going to do this, is to make sure that it is resourced, and it's resourced within the council to a greater extent, to allow this extra and additional work to go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo on the stats. I'm looking at page 66 of the pack, where it shows Telford and Wrekin is obviously significantly worse than some of the others. And I understand that part of the explanation is demographics. But looking at the picture as a whole for West Mercia and Warwickshire, it'd be useful then to compare us with other parts of the country, just to get a perspective as to how the rest of the country is fared, if those statistics are available. The other point, I'm looking at the further information on the back on page 71, and the other groups presumably have helped input into this strategy, like the NSPCC, Refuge and West Mercia Women's Aid, etc. And I think it's important that we do make sure that we are connecting with victims, as many as who wish to come forward and talk about their experiences, just to see what we could learn. I mean, the question that comes into my mind is, how much help? How could we have helped more to intervene along those processes before it got out of hand? I mean, the national staggering statistics that sometimes it only comes to light after someone's been abused 50 times. It's just, and I think it's similar to the CSE case we've got. If we can connect with the victims and try and find out what in their minds could help. What else we can tap into. So maybe a colleague officers here could say just how much we do tap into those who suffered from this, to try and learn from it as best we can, to see what help we can do to intervene.
Yeah. Before I bring the officers in, Ray, anything from yourself?
I think, and the officer will back me on this, the what sits behind domestic abuse and the patterns are quite clearly defined in all kinds of studies and are well known. So they're quite easy to identify. Part of the problem, and I heard it amazingly described once, is that domestic abuse is rather like, and you might not like this analogy, if you put a frog into cold water, into boiling water, it will jump out. if you put it into cold water and turn the heat up very slowly, it will boil to death. And I think I find that quite a powerful analogy about domestic abuse. Equally, I have been to some of the programmes that we offer and listened to what those people attending have said, and I know our officers have as well. So in terms of that, finding out what we could do to head it off, I think there's a lot of information already there. It's about joining it up, and that's what this strategy is talking about doing. I don't know if colleagues...
Yeah, we're using some of our residents who have lived experience of domestic abuse. We're already starting to do that with the White Ribbon campaign, and obviously these people are really brave because they feel able to speak out and share their lived experience. And as Ray alludes to, some of our recovery organisations want to be much more involved and are giving that peer support element and that commitment to that, which is great because they've got that community focus.
Yeah, I think one of the things it's easy to forget is the White Ribbon campaign is a campaign throughout the year. But there's huge amounts of services going on, commissioned by the council, for example, the Freedom Project. There's a huge amount of other support that we link into. And Ray, when you were the mayor, you raised money for a number of organisations that help victims of domestic abuse, and also increasingly the need for perpetrators themselves to access support in order to try and understand why they are acting like they are, and that's a more difficult issue, but it's really important that that happens and we don't victim blame, because one of the things I think that often happens is there's a blaming of victims, trying to put forward excuses why men behave in a particular way. It's almost certainly always men that offend in this way, and we don't blame victims at all, because I think that's really important. But also, I think that in terms of a wider system approach, you know, we have got less police officers in this town, which means that when people are really brave in order to pick the phone up and report this, often they are waiting longer to speak to a police officer in order for details to be taken. But when courts and the remand courts are centralised, that has an impact upon service users. So it's a whole system approach, and I think that it's important that government understand this, and there's been lots of warm words by the government around this agenda together with mental health, but actually it's important that it comes down to actions. And I agree that £2,500 for the Police and Crime Commissioner towards White Ribbon Town status is not enough, and I hope that John Campion can and the Police and Crime Commissioner, the role rather than the person, can help us further in regards to that.
Sorry, Chair. Is there a number? Is there a phone number or an email address or anything then that we can help at least publicise, where somebody who's being abused and wants to talk in confidence with somebody who may not want to therefore just go straight to the police, but really wants to be? Can we help publicise that?
The posters on the gent stores in this building, but one of the things I had done was they were under a lot of community buildings. Yeah, there is. I mean, the obvious one is West Mercia Women's Aid is the one.
That'd be good. As long as someone can ring up and find out, that'd be great.
Right. Well, hopefully the White Ribbon campaign is creating a culture where people feel that they will be believed. So that's this is, I think, it's an amendment to your recommendation, Ray, which I think you did say when you spoke to it. So it's the recommendation edited as well to include this goes on to full council. All those in favour? That's all. Thank you very much. In which case, then we'll move on to our next report on the agenda, which relates to the Lilleshall Parish Neighbourhood Plan. Richard Overton.
Thank you, Sean. As you know, this administration and council has been very supportive of neighbourhood planning. The Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan will be the 5th neighbourhood development plan to be made in the borough. Once made, the neighbourhood plan will become part of the council's local development plan and will be used to determine future plan applications within the parish of Lilleshall. The Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan has been developed by the Parish Council and was subject to public consultation between April and May 2018. The Council received the examiner's report in August 2018. The report concluded that with a few modifications, the plan should proceed to referendum. A referendum was held on the 15th of November and 80.5% of those who voted in a 34% turnout were in favour of the plan. I therefore move recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 to make the Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan.
Excellent. Any comments? Surprise, Andrew. Over to you.
Yeah. You'd be surprised if I didn't make a comment on this, I'm sure. I've seen this, the work involved in this firsthand and spent some time going through the process, right from the initial stages and then seeing it right the way through. So I'm well aware of the hard work. And it is hard work that local communities put into producing a plan like this. It's important that they do it. It represents what local people want to see. And I do congratulate those that have been involved in it. However, I will say this. I was very disappointed at Planning Committee last Wednesday, to see the Edgemond local plan. The policies in there were ignored. The policies in our local plan were ignored. Comments from his... Well, no, I'm talking on this report.
Andrew, can I just pause you for a second for two reasons, gently. Firstly, this is the Lilleshall Parish Neighbourhood Plan we're discussing, not the Edgemond one. And as you're well aware, the Plans Committee is quasi-judicial and is independent of the council, the cabinet. Sorry. So, could you just focus
the application is probably subject to call in anyway.
That's fine. That's a separate issue.
But the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of work are put into local plans by local people. They're reflecting the local need, and it is incumbent on this authority not only to recognise it as such as moments like this at cabinet and adopt it, but to make sure that those policies that local people want to see, how it ties into our own local plan, are actually carried through. Otherwise, it devalues the whole process. Now, that's most important. Now, I have to say, with a turnout of 34%, that was extremely high. And as I say, I've seen firsthand the work that's gone into this. And to get an endorsement locally, 80.5% on that is at a very high level. But it is incumbent on this authority to make sure that the wishes and the views of local people and how it's tied into the local plan are in fact respected and acted on.
As you know, Andrew, as a former leader of the council, the planning committee is quasi-judicial. It would not be appropriate for this cabinet to direct. I'm aware of that. I'm just repeating my point.
I heard it the first time.
Well, I'm repeating my point because it's an important point to make because you repeated what you said, and therefore it would be inappropriate for the cabinet to direct the planning committee one way or the other. Clearly, what we are doing as a cabinet, and as Richard has already said, this is not the first local plan that we've been able to work with communities on to make as part of the government's legislation around this. All planning applications can be called in at any time, and government inspectors can examine when they want to. And we know from other areas, government inspectors have overturned refusals by the planning committee, and sometimes they support them. That's a matter which is wholly separate to this. Bill, anything from yourself?
No. Welcome the plan.
Richard, anything from yourself?
No, I mean, I think, as you've just said regarding planning committee, what the officers may recommend, what that goes along the planning policy in that document, but when the members discuss it and make their decisions, that's up to the planning committee at that time. But as I said, this council is fully supportive of neighbourhood plan. We hope more parish and town councils bring forward neighbourhood plans or groups, because they do, they're very important to the people who put the hard work in, as you said, Andrew, in drawing up these plans. They do go through an inspector who then can put modifications forward to the plan before it goes to referendum. And and I appreciate all those people who do put the time and effort in, and as I said, it is planning policy, it sits alongside the neighbourhood plan, and I would welcome more to do it, and I'm really glad this is our fifth, and I hope there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I hope there's more to come.
Thank you. Catherine, anything from yourself?
No, it's fine, thank you.
Okay, so that's been proposed. All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll move on to our final item then on the agenda, which is the Early Years and Child Sufficiency Assessment 2018. Shirley Reynolds.
Thank you. The report before you today is the Early Years and Childcare Sufficiency Assessment. All local authorities are required to ensure the sufficient provision of care available for working families. This includes the childcare provision of children aged 0 to 14 years and rising to 18 years for children with additional needs. The Early Years and Childcare Sufficiency Assessment was carried out independently in the summer by HEPSLs, and various factors were taken into consideration, including Ofsted data, parental responses, provider input and parent and carer survey responses. The conclusions of the assessment are very positive and recognise that we have sufficient registered childcare provision to meet the needs of the young people in the borough. Quality in the early years provision in Telford and Wrekin has improved during the last 5 years from 79% and using the Ofsted ratings to 98% of settings now being judged good or better in 2018. This needs to be considered in context. This is a great achievement as we've got a higher proportion of early years settings being judged good or better than regional or national averages, which helps our children be more ready for school and support their success in transition into school. The usage of childcare was the highest amongst the 3 to 4 year old age range, and that reflects the universal early years entitlement with extended entitlement to 30 hours childcare for this age range. The take-up of the 30-hour childcare in its first year of implementation is very good and ahead of both national and regional averages. Overall, a very positive report. Its findings highlight the high ratings of the quality of provision across the borough, and both carers and parents express their satisfaction with the current arrangements and the quality of the childcare. I'd like to thank all the officers for their work in this very important area. Early years provision is vital. It is the cornerstone to success in our children's lives, and the responses to our survey show it's really appreciated by parents across the borough. I move all the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Shirley. Any comments or questions?
Good.
Really good report. Any comments, Paul? No? Excellent. Well, there you are. It must be a really good report. And, not a single criticism, not even from our opposition benches. Right, that's been moved then. All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Heather. Merry Christmas, everybody.